Today we are going to discuss the requisition worksheet. The requisition worksheet in the Advantage system is used to calculate the amount of inventory items that you need to either purchase or produce, and then also create your production or purchase orders right from that worksheet. Now, depending on if you are a multi-location company or not will determine which fields are used, or which cards actually I should say are used to calculate how much inventory we should go ahead and purchase or produce. And if you are using locations, it is going to look to the stock keeping unit card. And if you are not using locations, if you have no locations in your system, then it will just simply look to the inventory item card. Now, for the purposes of this video, we are going to be utilizing the multi-location approach, and we'll be looking at stock keeping unit cards to determine what should be ordered. For our example, let's go take a look at a couple of stock keeping unit cards before we go to our requisition worksheet. For more information on the stock keeping unit cards, be sure to watch our video on creating stock keeping units. Let's go out to the purchase button, and then we'll go to planning and pick items. And here, we're going to look first at this shim item card. Let's more specifically take a look at the stock keeping units by going to the item button and choosing stock keeping units. And let's look at the stock keeping unit card for the Boston location. If I go to my SKU button and choose card, here it shows me my stock keeping unit card for Boston. Now, you'll notice on this we have an inventory amount, total inventory in stock of 4. Okay, if I drill down into there, it'll show me the item ledger entry showing my quantity of 4 in Boston that I have in stock. It also shows me the quantity on sales order that I have is 24. So obviously I have a demand of 20 that isn't met at this point. If I click on the drill down arrow in that field, it'll show me any sales order lines that we have open in the system. So here, for instance, it shows me there are 2 different orders, sales order number 12 and 13. For the same item, they happen to fall on 2 separate orders. The first one has a quantity of 20, and the second one has a quantity of 4. If I scroll a little farther across, you'll also notice that the shipment date for the first one is 12/1 and the second one is 12/10. So they're 2 orders on 2 separate dates. Now, let's close out of this for a second and go back to, or go to the stock keeping unit cards planning tab. And here, you'll notice that we have some fields filled in. First off, it shows the reorder cycle. Now, what the reorder cycle does is that when I'm creating my requisition, I'm calculating how many I should be ordering. The system is going to look to for 30 days from the date that I'm calculating it to determine if there's any other orders out there that have this same item on there, or any other demand for this item out there, and then it's going to group them together to purchase from that same vendor. So in our particular case, we had one order for 20 on 12/1, and we had one order for 4 on 12/10. So if we run this, when we look at the ending date of this, and when we calculate our plan, it will look 30 days out, and if it happens to fall within that time period, they will calculate together, and we'll take a look at that when we get to there. It also shows here that we have a reorder quantity of 10. Okay, so we're saying that whenever we reorder from the vendor, we order as a quantity of 10 basically at the minimum amount at this point. So we're telling us to go ahead and order at least 10 when we go ahead and do this. So let's close out of the stock keeping unit card for this one. Just keep that in mind. And let's go back out to our item list, and let's take a look at item 103890, which happens to be a pin. And let's take a look at the stock keeping unit card for the Boston location for this one as well. If I go to the SKU card here, you'll notice that we don't have any on sales orders or service orders or anything but just a quantity of 2 in inventory in this case. Okay, so it shows here in Boston we've got a quantity of 2 of these pins. Now on the planning tab though, however, if you look here, we've got a couple of different fields filled out. It shows here we've got a reorder point set to 4. So here we've got that reorder point set to 4, and we've got our reorder quantity set to 5. So basically, with a reorder point set to 4, that means that whenever our inventory falls below 4, which it has in this case, we're sitting at 2 right now, right? Whenever it falls below 4, then we want to go ahead and place an order for additional quantity. And in this case, we said that our reorder quantity is going to be 5. So we expect that when we run this, we should have a quantity of 5 ordered for this particular item. Let's close out of that, and we'll take a look at one more and see which this one is. This is a shim in this particular case, and it is item number I'm sorry, not a shim. It's item number 110222, which is an oil seal. Okay, so when we take a look at the oil seal, let's go out to the item stock keeping unit. So we look at our stock keeping units and we'll look at the one for Boston. We happen to be on that line. And here now you'll notice that on our general tab it shows that we have in stock a quantity of 1. However, we have a quantity on sales order of 5. If I click on that drill down arrow, it shows on 1210 we have an order for a quantity of 5. It's sales order number 13. So it looks like that sales order 13 had two different items on it. Had the shim and it has this oil seal. So here, quantity on sales order is 5, so obviously we have a demand, at least of 4 in this case. When we go over to the planning tab, you'll notice here we've also set a reorder point. We say whenever it falls below 5, we want to order a reorder quantity of 5. So in this particular case, since we have a demand, it is going to generate that order. Even if we didn't have a demand, it would generate it because we're below that reorder point. Now the point I want to make on this one though is that we set an order multiple for this of 2. Whenever we order from this particular vendor, or order this item from a vendor, the order multiple we've defined is 2. That means that we have to order at least 2 at a time for this. So since we need to reorder at least a quantity of 5. We're saying our reorder quantity is 5. What'll happen is we're expecting that the system will go here and say, all right, you know what, we need to order multiples of 2, so we have to order at least 5, so let's order 6. So we're going to order a quantity of 6 in this case because the order multiple is 2. So let's go back to back to the item card here for a second, and this is where I wanted to point out one last thing, and before we get to the requisition worksheet. We were looking at the item stock keeping units, right? We had the stock keeping unit for each one of these items where we determined the planning for that. If you are a no location company, meaning you don't have any locations defined in the system, you're not using locations, you would just simply enter in your planning information on the item card itself, which would be on this planning tab here. Instead of on the SKU, you do it on the item card, and it shows a reorder policy, all the same fields that you can enter here, and the system will look to these fields to determine what it should reorder based on what you've defined for that particular item. But since we're using multi-locations, it's going to look to the stock keeping units. Okay, I'm going to close out of that item and let's go take a look at our requisition worksheet. If we go to the planning folder and choose requisition worksheets, I'm going to now minimize my navigation pane so you can see more fields here. And basically what we're going to do here is on the requisition worksheet we could just enter in information here if we want. We can manually enter lines, or we can have the system go out and calculate for us, which is a lot easier once you've defined your variables for each one of your stock keeping units or items. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's calculate the plan and take a look at the lines that it creates. If we go to the functions button and we choose calculate plan, you'll notice here that it brings up our calculate plan window. Now I've applied a filter to this for the Boston location. We're not going to run this for every single one of the locations. I just want to set the location filter to Boston because that happens to be all of the items we looked at. The stock keeping units were for the Boston location. So it'll make it run a little bit quicker in this case. And if we move over to the options tab, here we define what we want our order date to be. What's going to happen is each one of these stock keeping units had a fixed reorder quantity reorder policy when we created that. So that means that it's going to create purchase orders for us instead of production orders. So here we've got our order date. This will create our purchase order once we carry out the action messages on this requisition worksheet. When we create it, it'll create our purchase order as of 12/1. And here we're looking at the ending date. What the ending date field does is it scans through all of our demand through 12/31 to create a purchase order in this particular case for that demand. Now you'll notice that when we looked at those, or if you recall, when we looked at the sales orders that we had entered in the system, we had two sales orders. One was on 12/1, one was on 12/10. So with that, it's going to pull in both of those sales order demands in this particular case. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say OK to this and watch what happens with the system. It goes through and it calculates our plan for us. It scans through each one of our inventory items to find out if there's anything that it needs to order based on demand. And that demand could be based off of a sales order like we looked at. It could also be based off of when we looked at the PIN, we didn't have anything on a sales order, but we did have a minimum quantity of 5 defined, or we set a reorder point of 5 defined, and we only had a quantity of 1 there. So it's going to go ahead and reorder because of that particular one. So that's a demand as well. So let's take a look at each one of these fields that got entered in for us. First off here, we've got item number 100194, and this is our shim. Okay. Now, this shim, if you recall, when we were looking at that, we had on that item card, if we go back out to that stock keeping unit and take a look at that Boston one, we've got in this particular case a quantity on sales order of 24. Because we've got it set on two different orders, right? A 20 and 4 in this particular case for two different days, and we also have a stock of inventory of 4. On our planning tab, we said we wanted to combine everything by putting a reorder cycle in here of 30 days. We said we want to look 30 days out from 12/1 to see if we can combine anything together. And it did find those that we can combine. So it combined them both together onto one purchase order, onto one line that it's going to create for a purchase order of a quantity of 20. So everything looks good with that. On the next line, which happens to be our pin, right, we have a quantity of 5 that got brought in. And the reason for that is when we go back out to that items stock keeping unit card and take a look here, we've got on the general tab we only had a quantity of 2 and we don't have anything on order. So the demand or the order came from the planning tab here. We set our reorder point. If you fall below 4, which we're at now, we had a quantity of 2, we're going to reorder a quantity of 5. So that's the reason why we've got that quantity of 5 in here. It looks like we also pulled in an additional item that I didn't talk about, which happens to be a ring in this particular case. Here it shows 107486. If I click on that lookup here, we've got a quantity of 16 that was purchased. If we go to the item stock keeping unit for Boston, okay, and take a look at this, it looks like here on the general tab we have in stock 4 of them. If we go to the planning tab, we said that anytime we fall below 20, we want to reorder a quantity of 10. Now, since we are currently at a quantity of 4 here, we wanted to bring it back up to the reorder point of 20. What happened was that the system generated an order for 16 of them. And then if we take a look at this oil seal here, if we click on the lookup arrow there, we've got a quantity of 6 for 2 separate ones here. Let's take a look at the item stock keeping unit for this. You'll notice here, if we go to the SKU card, we've got, in this particular case, a quantity of 1, right, in stock. And our quantity on sales order is a quantity of 5. If I click on that drill down arrow here, you'll notice it brings us out and it shows that quantity of 5 for that particular sales order number 13. So when we look at the planning tab here, what we said was that the reorder point for this is set to 5. Now we have in this particular case, since we have a quantity on sales order of 5, meaning we have a demand of 5 in this case, we need to go ahead and bring that up there. So what the system is going to do is it's going to order 5 for that particular one, but we also need to bring the reorder point back up to 5 again. So it's actually created 2 lines for us for that. So one is going to be for the order and one will be to bring it back into stock. Now we also said here that there is an order multiple of 2 defined. And what that means is that since we said the order multiple is 2, we can only order in quantities of 2 at a time. So what it does is it actually goes through and says, all right, I need to order at least 5 for this one, so we're going to order 6, and then I need to order 5 to bring me back up to my reorder point again, so we're going to order 6 for that one as well. So that is the reason why I brought in the 2 lines at the 6 each. Now, let's review over each one of these fields just to discuss this. Of course, the item and the number come in from that item. We have an action message here, and you'll notice there are a couple different selections here. There is new, change quantity, reschedule, and change quantity, and cancel. Now in this field, the program is going to propose an action for you to take in order to rebalance the current demand supply situation based on that inventory item. So it may propose any one of these options here. Now since these are all brand new things, it's choosing new, which means to create a new order. If it chose change quantity, that means it's going to change the quantity on an existing order. Let's say I had an open purchase order out there that hasn't been received or anything yet. It can go through and scan out if we've got additional demand. It gets pulled into the requisition. It could propose to change that to add additional demand or additional items to that particular order. It may choose to reschedule the due date on an existing order or reschedule the due date and change the quantity, and then it also may choose to suggest to cancel a particular order. Let's say something got canceled and you pulled it out of there, pulled the demand off of that, it might choose to cancel that particular order. By checking the box here to accept the action message, what that does is that means that when we go ahead and run our function to carry out the action message, it means that it's going to create a new order for each one of those. Here it brings in our description, our location, original quantity. If you happen to have a one of the action messages of, let's say, change quantity. It would show you the original quantity of the order here, and then it'll show us the quantity that it's proposing over here. In the unit of measure code field, it shows that unit of measure for the item, shows the direct unit cost for that got pulled in. If you happen to have a particular due date for a particular order, and then it made that change, it would show the original due date and then the new due date over here. It also shows the vendor that we are going to be purchasing from and what that vendor's item number is, and then of course the replenishment system. Since all of these are set to fixed reorder quantity, they're all set to purchase for the replenishment system. Okay, so the next step in this, you can review over each line if you want. You can also go to the line card for this, and it'll bring you actually out to the item card for each one of the items. You can go from the line button as well, check availability if you want, look at dimensions for that particular line and make sure they came in properly, which of course they did. But then what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the functions button. Now obviously we chose calculate plan before. You've got a couple of other options here. Drop shipment and special order are both advanced topics covered in our advanced training series, but what we're going to do is we're going to choose to carry out our action message, which is going to look up to this action message column here to carry out what we're telling it to do. We said we're going to accept it, so we're going to say to carry out the action message, and then what it does is allows us to go ahead and choose to print our purchase orders once they get created. If we check that box, it would print it to a default printer. We'll just simply say OK, and we'll go take a look at the purchase order that gets created upon running this. So now you'll notice it wiped out our requisition worksheet. We can close out of that for the time being because it copied all those over to a new order. So now what we can do is come to our order processing folder and take a look at a purchase order, and now you'll notice it brought in here for Nissan Forklift Corporation on 12/1 of 04 every single one of those quantities. So it actually created our purchase order for us. So at this point now we can go ahead and print it off, send it off over to the vendor, and expect to receive our goods in whenever they're expected in. So that is how you use your requisition worksheet to generate purchase orders found within the system. And this concludes the video on using your requisition worksheets.